Welcome to Chapter 14, the peripheral nervous system. In this lecture, we will look at the spinal nerves, we will look at the general senses, and we'll look at the four plexes that are associated with the neck and the limbs. So, what is the peripheral nervous system, or PNS? Well, the central nervous system is the brain and spinal cord. So, the peripheral nervous system is everything else. It is these ganglia here. It is the nerves here. And it's actually receptors as well. So we're going to look at receptors too. So you are going to be able to explain what the peripheral nervous system is made up of. You'll be able to identify what a nerve plexus is and what a ganglia is. And you'll be able to identify where nerve cell bodies are in the peripheral nervous system and explain what the functions of the peripheral nervous system is. So, the overview. The job of the peripheral nervous system is to get somatic sensory information, that's senses, visceral sensory information, that is if your bladder is full, and carry motor signals to the muscles and glands. So the peripheral nervous system includes all ganglia and nerves and receptors as well, because we're going to have a receptor carrying an afferent signal to the CNS, and then another neuron going to the muscle or the gland. So it is basically everything that is not part of the central nervous system. So we're going to do some vocabulary. Our first word is ganglion. G is for ganglion. So remember, we have sensory receptors. So here is a lamellated corpuscle, and it is going to carry a signal on an afferent neuron to the spinal cord. Now, if you remember, afferent neurons are unipolar. So they have these cell bodies that are basically being put out like that. So there are cell bodies. They're found in structures called ganglia. So this ganglia right here is the posterior root ganglia. So, if you remember our last chapter on the spine, we have a receptor on the spinal cord, and it's going on the posterior rami to the nerve, and there is going to be the cell body in the posterior root ganglia. So we can have another one coming from the anterior side, goes on the anterior rami, and then it's going to go into the posterior root, and there's a ganglia with cell bodies right there. Now, a nerve. A nerve is a bundle of myelinated axons, and some are unmyelinated too. So here we have our anterior root. Motor signals are going to go on the anterior root. That's the anterior horn, and it is going to go out and become part of the nerve. We're going to have sensory signals going in the posterior root. There's our ganglia, and to the posterior horn. So this is just myelinated and unmyelinated axons. Now the cell bodies can be in nuclei. So we have our anterior horn right here, and you have the cell bodies there, or you have the cell bodies in this ganglia right here. Now, a nerve plexus is just a bundle or joining of nerves going to a specific part. We're going to look at four named ones here, but let's look at just 4, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 5 nerves coming off. These guys are going to join together, and this one and these are going to join together, but they're not happy. So this guy and this guy meet up, and this guy meets up. And my pen just messed my picture up. See how they're just weaving and coming together? That is what a plexus is. That is what this big scary thing is. So a plexus is just a bundle of nerves coming together. Now, a sensoreceptor is a structure in the peripheral nervous system that detects a change and excites something. This is one of my favorite sensoreceptors. It's a taste bud. I have all these special taste cells that'll get excited when you taste something sweet or salty or sour and send signals on afferent neurons. This right here, it's a very bad drawing. It actually looks like this. Do you guys remember what that is? That's just a lamellated corpuscle. That is a type of receptor for deep touch. So functions of the peripheral nervous system: to detect changes at receptors and send signals on afferent neurons. Now, these signals can either be somatic sensory, which is what you're aware of, or visceral, and that's stuff you're not aware of, like blood oxygen levels. Now, the central nervous system is going to decide how to respond. And it's going to send signals on efferent neurons to muscles, in the case of the somatic motor, or muscles or glands in the case of the autonomic motor. So the function is to gather the sensory information, send it to the central nervous system decides how to respond, then that sends it either to our voluntary muscles for the somatic or our involuntary muscles for the autonomic. So, define peripheral nervous system, ganglia, and nerve. I will give you 5 seconds. The peripheral nervous system is everything outside the brain and spine. All nerves, receptors, and ganglia. So what's a ganglia? They are neuron cell bodies outside the central nervous system. So what's a nerve? A nerve is a bundle of axons going into / out of the CNS. Don't show your English teachers that. We're going to look at receptors now, and you'll be able to contrast between a sense and a stimuli. You'll be able to contrast between the special senses, which we have a whole chapter, and general senses in terms of distribution and receptor types. You'll be able to describe the general senses and explain what receptor field and sensitivity is. So, receptors are just something that detects a change. They could be simple. So this would be a pain receptor, just dendrites. So it could be simple. Remember the skin chapter? Remember our little Vienna sausages? There's the Vienna sausage. That's a Meissner or tactile corpuscle. That detects a light touch. And those are very primitive. Now over here we have a cone, which lets you see vision. Over here we have a hair cell. Let's do the hair cell like that. And it has these little tiny stereocilia that detect vibrations that lets you hear the latest Taylor Swift song. So they can be very simple or very complicated. What they share in common is they always send an impulse on an afferent neuron to the central nervous system. Now, the receptor field is just the area one little receptor detects. So here we have our Meissner's corpuscles. I think this is actually supposed to be showing the tactile discs in your epidermis. And here's a caliper. So this caliper we'll say is an inch apart in both cases. Now if you touch this caliper on the back of your shoulder, even though there's 2 sharp needles right there, you probably will only feel 1 prick because our dendrite here is humongous. That's a very large receptor field. So your shoulder blade here is not very sensitive. Your fingertips, on the other hand, are highly sensitive. It's one of the most sensitive parts of your body. So if you touch here, this pinprick touches one dendrite, this one a separate dendrite, so that will excite 2 different neurons, so you'll feel both of them. So the receptor field is the entire area that one receptor is responsible for. Now there's senses versus stimuli. We get stimuli all the time. Blood oxygen levels, blood sugar levels, how full your bladder is, how full your small intestine is, how full your stomach is. Generally, we're not aware of these. So we're not aware of all stimuli. If we become aware of it, it's called a sensation or a sense. So stimuli is just something that excites a receptor, where our senses are sight, hearing, touch, taste, and smell. That should be simple. Why does Wikipedia say there are 32 senses then? our senses are broken down into two categories. Special senses require special receptors. Those would be sight, hearing, smell, taste, and balance. And they go to different parts of the brain, such as hearing goes to the temporal lobe. We have sight going to the occipital lobe. The general senses are everywhere. The receptors are simple. They could just be a free nerve ending, like in the case of pain, or they could be a lamellated corpuscle, in the case of deep touch. Now, the general senses go to this area of the brain right here. Remember that area? It's central sulcus is behind it. This is the post-central gyrus. So, the general senses include light touch, deep touch, pain, temperature, pain, limb positioning, stretching. I think my kindergarten teacher lied to me. There's a few more than 5 senses out there. So, receptors for general senses tend to be simple. They're either exposed dendrites, in the case of pain and temperature, or encapsulated corpuscles, in the case of touch. Remember our lamellated corpuscle? That's actually a Meissner's corpuscle. They're also called tactile. So, pain and temperature rely on free nerve endings. And pain is caused by damaged tissue that binds to the dendrite. Cold and warm receptors, it's going to change proteins. It tells you, are we going from hot to cold, such as jumping from the hot tub into the swimming pool, or from cold to hot, such as from getting from the swimming pool to the hot tub. And nociception is pain. So our pain and temperature receptors are exposed or free dendrites or nerve endings. Encapsulated corpuscles are covered by glial cells. The lamellated corpuscle is actually a Schwann cell surrounding a dendrite. Now, the Meissner's corpuscles are light touch and texture, lamellated deep touch, and we've talked about them. These actually adapt quickly, so if you put a bunch of pennies on your finger or your arm, you'd stop noticing them after a while. These don't really adapt that well. Now, there's some others. The Ruffini corpuscles let you know of joint movements, skin stretching, and I just like the cross end bulb. That's in your mucous membranes. It tells you you have a booger. So touch receptors are encapsulated nerve ending. So I'll either ask you what temperature and pain receptors are, free nerve endings, or touch, encapsulated. Now you have some other cool ones. Proprioceptors tell you about limb positioning. Tendon organs are actually what your doctor is doing when he's testing your reflex. There are these receptors in the tendons that detect stretching and tell you, oh no, we're stretching too far. Muscle spindles are in the perimysium and prevent overstretching of muscles. So, what are pain receptors? Free nerve endings or encapsulated? It is 1. Touch receptors then, free nerve endings or encapsulated? It is 2. For temperature, that's right, free nerve endings.